My name is Brett O'Shea, the host of Rev Left Radio and co-host of Guerrilla History and Red Menace. Happy to be here.
I actually wanted to talk to you about Guerrilla History. How did that start?
Yeah, no, it came out of nowhere. It was one of those opportunities that you don't expect and just opens up, and then you participate and you're very happy you did. I was just out of nowhere reached out to by Henry, and my co-host Henry Hakamaki and Adnan Hussein had worked together on the David Feldman Show, sort of progressive, long-form podcast, or literally 7-hour episodes and stuff. And they do some hosting, and they guest, and they met each other through that. And then I guess they were both fans of Rev Left, and they thought it'd be really cool to have that voice, the sort of less polished, less academic, that working class voice that I guess Rev Left is known for. So they reached out and said, you'd be a good addition. Adnan is the director of religious studies at Queen University and is a practicing Sufi Muslim and has all that expertise. And then Henry's an immunobiologist, I think, in grad school, and he lives in Russia and has some unique experiences. And I come out of a philosophy background. It's us three together would be kind of interesting. And so, yeah, and then they have the academic inroad in a lot of ways that I don't. So they'll have a lot of familiarity with a book coming out and how to reach out to them in a network that I'm not always tapped into. Mm-hmm. So we get some guests that we otherwise wouldn't have got. And Henry, for example, recently got the founder of the Communist Party of the Philippines. And to be able to talk to him and learn about the communist struggle in the Philippines firsthand from the creator of the organization, is just absolutely fascinating. So yeah, it sort of happened as a beautiful opportunity that I said, let's do it. And it's turned out great. And, with all three of the shows, it's kind of cool because I get to do something a little different. With Rev Left, it's whatever the fuck Brett wants to talk about, which gives me the full freedom to do anything. Red Menace is very we'll read a text of left political theory and we'll teach it and we'll elaborate on it and have a discussion about it. So it's more philosophy oriented. And then Guerrilla History allows me, to really dive into history itself and to focus on that. So I kind of think all three benefit each other and play off each other.
Nice. Yeah. You've been podcasting for a long time.
Yeah, I know.
How long has it been? What, 5 years?
Coming up on 5.
Holy moly. I remember when you got all stoked about, we're going to pull out some old history here. Maybe some context for listeners. Brett and I have been friends for, 5 years now?
Yeah, I think longer, maybe. Right around there, though.
Yeah, we met right after Trump got elected, right?
In fact, our first activist activity together was sneaking into, what was it? The
Turning Point USA, yeah.
And to monitor them to see how far right they were. So we were basically strangers at that point.
Oh, yeah.
But we went on a mission together.
Yeah, we went on a mission together. We showed up in camo hats and shit and sat through this Turning Point USA meeting where these college Republicans were talking about the affirmative action bake sale or some shit. Yeah.
And then Fidel Castro had just died, and they opened it up with whatever that song, bye bye. I don't know. I forget the exact song, but it was they're all dancing on the grave of Fidel Castro.
Yeah,
I was biting my teeth.
that was an interesting time. That was an interesting time for politics too. And
turns out they were just young Republican dorks and not neo-Nazi fascists.
Yeah. Fast forward a couple of years.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, Brett and I met, and we organized together with the Nebraska Left Coalition for a number of years, 2? And then you started your podcast, and I can remember Caffeine. We were sitting on the patio of Caffeine Dreams, I think, and you were talking about the podcast idea for Revolutionary Left Radio, and then fucking got started. Yeah. And now you're pretty much just your recognizable name and sort of someone that the American left really turns to for political education and, helping people get interested in leftist ideology more broadly, Here's a question. Who is the most, if you can answer this, who is the most impactful guest that you've had?
Ooh, shit.
Or maybe top 5, if that helps.
Yeah, that's really, because we're hundreds of episodes in, and sometimes it's quite a blur, and I have to go back and think about all the guests that I've had. I don't know about the single most impactful. I know some episodes tend to stand out to me, looking back, that I'm particularly proud of. One that always jumps to mind is the episode we did on Vietnam, and the clips we used in that episode were particularly heartbreaking. And I remember reading about it, prepping for it, doing it, releasing it, adding the clips in, watching the documentaries, and just being brought to tears like constantly from that. And I learned a lot in that entire process about the Vietnam War and being able to tell the anti-imperialist story that doesn't emphasize the anti-war left in the U.S. like so many ostensibly left versions of the Vietnam War does, but really emphasizes the Vietnamese perspective. Was huge to me. I would really have to go back and go through them. I could probably conduct a list of ones that really impacted me. But what I try to do is take some core lessons from every single episode that I can then go forward. And I think one of my great skills is not necessarily being a creator of leftist theory or anything like that, but a synthesizer and a connector. So I can make these connections across topics. And every episode that I do gives me new, touchstones and new data points to make those connections and to show how all these things are intimately connected historically, philosophically, socially, politically, etc. So yeah, it would be hard for me to say the most impactful, and even trying to separate one guest out from the others is a very difficult process, as you know. So I have to give that more thought. But
yeah. What's the weirdest part about podcasting full time?
Shit, man. I mean, the whole just being able to do it full time is absolutely mind-boggling to me, and I am racked with anxiety every day that it's going to go away, because my entire life since I was 15 come from a lower working class family, and if I wanted anything, I had to start working. So I started working at 14 doing manual labor on a golf course, and worked at Pizza Hut, and worked at Long John Silver's, worked shitty retail jobs. I worked at a gas station for a long time, and it really fucking sucked. First 15 years of my working life is these shitty jobs, barely getting by. I had a daughter when I was 19, so I have that extra responsibility. And just, not like I used to deliver pizzas, for example, and my car would break down because I didn't have the gas. And I'm always playing this game of I go to my job as a pizza delivery guy. I have to use gas to get the tips that I'm hoping will be enough to put gas in the thing. Mm-hmm. So I had to call my buddies to come pour gas in my shit, pizza on my passenger side seat. So just being able to escape that is I'm incredibly grateful for. I took out a $10,000 loan actually to quit my retail job because I couldn't at the level our Patreon was at. It was unfeasible for me to do it. But I was like, I'm really gonna put everything I have into this. So I took out a $10K loan, and I was like, this gives me 5 months of breathing room to turn this fucking thing into something. And I just went as hard as I could, and it worked out. And I just recently, after 4 years, has been able to finish that debt. So I'm paid off with that debt. And it got me and my family through COVID. My wife went through a pregnancy that she lost and is pregnant again. So we've been pregnant for a fucking year. Mm-hmm. And to have her not have to go out and work, she's worked at Walmart. She's a bartender, a waitress. That was her jobs before that. Has been amazing. Yeah. But then every single day, it's like, when is this going to end? I feel guilty because other working class people in my exact position that feel the exact same, existentially devastating feelings don't have that escape, don't even have the opportunity to escape that. So there's guilt. And then there's anxiety that it's all going to go away and I'm going to be tossed back down into these shitty fucking jobs that I fucking hate. That really, I am predisposed to depression and shit, but that stuff really crushed me. And so it's, when you get the thing that you've always wanted and could not imagine, this is rewarding. I'm my own boss. Holy shit. It's very Buddhist in that, you also get revealed all the anxiety and the guilt and the negative side that comes with it. So, nothing in life is wholly good.
Do you have a plan B at all?
No, I know.
No, not at all.
No, this is the only skill I have, is to be able to talk pretty words.
But that's a good skill to have.
It is, and I'm blessed that I've been able to turn it into something that can support my family. But plan B, I don't know. I think all my buddies are in unions, so you can go through that process. You're apprentice for a while, not earning great money, the first one cut from a job site. So those first few years of being in a union are really rough, but if you can get past them, it pays off. Yeah. So I would maybe go in that direction, or truck drivers, because there's this huge labor squeeze. Their wages are going up for truck drivers, the supply chain issues, etc. So that could be something that I could at least make a living and support my family with. Yeah. But yeah, I just, I would like to be able to do this. So, yeah.
I mean, me too. I like podcasting.
And it's interesting because it allows us to tell our own stories. It gives voices to people who would otherwise never have voices. The far right gets dark money propping it up, so even things on the right that seem ostensibly grassroots are always either astroturfed or have dark money funding it because capital has an interest in that entire political program.
Yeah.
Corporate liberal media, clearly, you have an ability to get big money and advertisers and everything like that. But working class, raw, communist, we have to depend on ourselves. We're always going to be underground and independent by definition in a capitalist society. And so just seeing the amount of regular working people that are willing to toss out a few dollars to keep this program going gives me a sense of real responsibility that I have to use this platform responsibly. And I have to be continually learning so that I can be good at what I do, and not good in the sense like I'm just happy with the job that I'm doing, but like to make a meaningful impact on people and to be able to convince people of our point of view. And young people coming up, like now I'm in my 30s, and looking at people that reach out to me in high school or in college and saying, you're a fundamental shaper of my political worldview. That is humbling.
That's a lot of pressure.
The responsibility that comes with it. I try to take that very seriously. So
yeah,
it's a whirlwind.
I mean, it is a lot of pressure. I mean, I don't have nearly as much podcasting experience as you. I actually got my start in podcasting by coming on your show and meeting Pearson and getting into Coffee with Comrades, which was a really fun show for a time,
Totally.
And there's this weird, you have a public face, you're off social media pretty much entirely. So that's kind of a difference between us is I still have a Twitter account that I started because I went on your show and wanted people to be able to reach out to me. And there's this really interesting thing that's been happening over the last year because I gained a shitload of followers while I was reporting on protests in Minneapolis and Omaha, and people recognize you when you're like out at the bar and stuff and say, "Hey, I follow your Twitter, I love your shit," and it's just like, it's like, oh, cool, great, wow, okay. So now I actually have to just like be someone that can be relied upon, in whatever capacity. It's a lot of pressure. You don't
weird.
Yeah, you don't really get the benefit of being able to fuck up in private. So you really have to like think about what you're talking about when you do these types of shows and stuff. And I don't know. I don't think I would change how I've done my work. You know what I mean? I like working in media, and I like working in academia, and I like being sort of like a public intellectual in a lot of different ways. But it is very strange, the sort of parasocial relationships that people start to build with you on social media, and they have these certain expectations about who you are and how you act. And sometimes it can be kind of awkward to interact with them. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's a very strange sort of relationship that you have with your listenership sometimes. And
to be on both sides of that parasocial relationship, because there are plenty of voices out there on the left and just more broadly intellectual voices that have been crucial for me that I still listen to, that help me think through complicated issues. And so I am in the position of listening to another person who doesn't know me, but I've listened to hundreds of hours of them talking. And, disagree with some things, agree with others, get something out of it, obviously, because I continue to listen. And that's really what the parasocial relationship is like, you listen to them for many hours, they don't listen to you for many hours, and that can create some weird discontinuities in that relationship. But being on both sides of it, where I have listeners, but also I am a listener, it's kind of, you're in this weird position. Yeah, it's interesting how you interact with those people. Most recently, I started a Twitter DM sort of acquaintanceship with Peter Gelderloos. Just randomly decided to. He's an anarchist scholar who wrote. Nonviolence Will Not Save You, I think is what it's called. Wow. Wow. It's been a while since I... Blinking hard. But I quoted a lot of his work in an article that I wrote for Protean magazine that keeps coming back around about Extinction Rebellion. And one day I just sent him a DM because it's like, I've read all your stuff. You're on Twitter.
I have a question. So, I sent him a DM and I was fully expecting him to be a certain way, this very upstanding, stiff kind of guy who's writing very principled anarchist writing, right? Nicest dude I've ever talked to, super chill guy, couch surfing in Spain, I think, he funds all of his work by essentially just like hopping around in these various squats in Spain and writing these really interesting philosophical sort of essays about various aspects of anarchism. And he's super nice, awesome. And I think it's really interesting that you sort of build up this perception of who these people are. And then when you actually get to talking to them, you realize that like whatever absurdity you've sort of built around them due to their celebrity, or they just, they talk about a lot of things that you jive with, you know what I mean? And then they're just human beings. Yeah. And fallible human beings at that. Absolutely.
And I think there is a difference there with writing and podcasting. I think podcasting, I've said this many times, is like the most intimate sort of media form, even more intimate than seeing somebody. Like a YouTube channel, you'd think that's intimate, and in fact, why wouldn't it on its surface be more intimate than podcasting, because you actually get to see them? But that's precisely what makes it less intimate, is like the person on screen, whether it's an actor in a movie or just a YouTube content creator, is out there. You're looking across the room at the TV and seeing them. With podcasting, it's in your ear. And I even made this point recently with my interview with a YouTuber, Hakeem. It's even more intimate than listening to the radio, because in your car driving the radio, the voice is disembodied, but it's still like at arm's reach. You can turn the volume up and down, and it's like the whole car. But when you put earbuds in and you listen to a human being talk, it almost takes on the form of your inner dialogue. You know what I'm saying? And that creates an insane level of intimacy that I feel as a podcast fan, that I've listened to podcasts since they became a thing. Well before I was a podcaster, I was deeply a podcast fan.
Right.
And working my shitty jobs, podcast got me through it. And so I was able to be like, this works for me. There's some, spots out here on the left that are not filled that I feel like I can meaningfully maybe fill. So I'm going to give it a shot. And so it's been interesting. But even with writing, it might be, it's different because, when you write something, you sit back, you consider every sentence, you have a certain voice that comes across when you write. But to be able to talk to somebody who's written that, it's very different, Right. But podcasting is like, you get to be truly yourself, and people get to kind of feel like they know you, because in some sense they do.
Right.
And you know me, I am who I am on the show that I am off. Like there's like zero space between that. And that level of me just being 100% myself, I don't have a choice. I can't be anybody else, and I'm not the sort of person that would pretend to be.
Right.
It is interesting, because the people that have a relationship to me, that have listened to hundreds of hours, they do know me in some fundamental sense. In fact, if you listen to like hours and hours and hours of Rev Left, like, you know me more intimately, like my inside, than like people in my family, and like friends I've had since I was in grade school.
Right.
So that's certainly there, and I want to reciprocate. Like, I wish I could. I guarantee people listen that if I got a chance to meet them one-on-one in person, they would be my fucking friends, and we would hang out and go get drinks together and shit.
Right.
But I don't always obviously get to do that for space and time and all those other reasons. But yeah, it's surreal to be in that position for sure.
Yeah. I think maybe like we know we're fucked if we suddenly start trying to affect something that isn't anything other than who we are.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And anybody that does do that, any discernible person sees right through it.
Right. Well, and there's still some sort of pressure to kind of like act to that sometimes,
sure.
Maybe it's just like the last 18 months or so, but like a lot of my social interaction has been online, and it's kind of like pushed me to this point where I'm like reevaluating my relationship with social media and the internet, because it's not necessarily something that's wholly unhealthy, but it takes up a lot of my time, and it makes it less fun, waking up every day, flipping on Twitter, scrolling through whatever doom news is coming across Twitter, getting outraged before I've even had my cup of coffee, and then, I've ruined my entire day. You know what I mean? Yeah. And like, when I was working over the summer, I was working at Noise here in Omaha. I, made a bid for trying to be a full-time journalist. Didn't work out as well as I wanted
economy.
it to. Yeah, it didn't really work out as well as I wanted it to, but it was a very illuminating and good experience to work with these reporters. But I ran into some situations where I had to get a Facebook that I regularly updated with, I had to be as a part of the noise news ecosystem on Facebook. And they asked me to make a completely new Twitter account for like my professional work. And I found myself having to stifle my own personal politics in public in order for me to do the job. Because even though Noise is a nonprofit independent news service, they strike out near the political middle,
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. They're trying to represent what is a very diverse readership within, and also address a news desert in North Omaha. And there's very specific reasons why they make their coverage that way. But it was difficult for me because, me, I have and always will be outspoken about my politics, even as they sort of shift and change as the years pass,
Always.
And it was very strange to me to have to separate those two sides of myself, obscure one for the sake of professionalism, quote, professionalism, and sort of temper back the more personal side, right? And make it clear that these are my personal opinion. You know what I mean? It was very strange over the summer to have to do that. Now I just kind of obscure like where I work. I don't really talk about, where I'm teaching or any of that. The listeners could probably glean where, simply just so that I can keep my own political perspective from getting trampled on and threatening my livelihood, because that's the reality in this country. When you're a leftist, sometimes you speak a little too loudly, and you end up getting unjustly murked for it. So
Or just targeted. I've because of the platform, I've been doxxed 3 times. Our old show, The Guillotine, was brought up on InfoWars, and hearing Alex Jones rail against you is fucking surreal. I've had FBI agents show up at my house. So yeah, with being
Same.
I know you have, and I know you've been doxxed by the right.
Yeah.
So having any sort of voice and putting yourself out there, somebody on the far left in this country, it's always been true. That you're gonna put a fucking target on your back. And with kids and shit, it's been particularly difficult for me.
Yeah, it's surreal to have to like warn your family members that someone may be throwing shit at their door.
Right. Exactly.
Especially after the events of last year, and the recent news that came out of Minneapolis that cops were hunting protesters and journalists and stuff. When I was in Minneapolis, getting stalked by vigilantes in the neighborhoods of Minneapolis.
I followed that scenario. It was absolutely
that was terrifying. And having to sneak out of the city because they blocked off the bridges to St. Paul. We were going to get arrested if we rolled through, and couldn't go back to our hotel room. And coming back to Omaha and all of the protests and all of the shit that happened and the fucking lawsuit with the city and everything.
The bridge incident,
which is still fresh in everyone's mind.
Images from that night are insane.
Oh my God. Yeah, it was nuts. That was an experience. I saw some of the folks that were arrested that night a couple of months later. No, a couple of months ago. Yeah. I was down under bar, and there were a shitload of them there. I don't know, it's a karaoke or a show or something.
Yeah. It's a spot for the local left.
They recognized me, and we had a conversation. And of course, we're all drunk. So this is the first time that we had like a chance to talk to each other after that incident happened. And it's like fundamentally changed quite a few people, just the experience of that 48 hours of having a protest, getting kettled on a bridge, getting brutalized on that bridge. Like, let me tell you, the amount of police on that bridge was absolutely insane. There were probably 50 or 60 people in SWAT gear with guns on their giant fucking guns, walking around, talking shit to the protesters. And, some people are coughing because there's just like capsaicin everywhere from the pepper balls, and
not being allowed bathroom breaks.
No,
when you're locked up for hours.
No water, nothing. And then seeing them on the back end. Me and Jazari Kual, who was another media person who was detained and let go. We were outside the jail that next day, and these folks are coming out shell shocked.
Dude, it's traumatizing.
Fucking wild shit. you know? And, like, to top that all off, you get doxxed by fucking Nazis. And that's...
Because when you get arrested by the state, then they look at... That happened to me, too. You get arrested, your name's on the news with this protest, so then you are, you know, you're an easy target because your real name, your real face is up on the news. And then, yeah, you get targeted by the far right. So you get your ass kicked by the state, and the far right picks up the crumbs and comes after you.
Yeah, I got some of my reporting on Jake Gardner got picked up by far right pundits and shit. And, yeah, it's not fun to have to, like, call your mom and be like, hey, by the way, if someone random knocks on your door, don't open the door, you know? Exactly. We're going to try and scrub the internet of your address, you know what I mean? And I ended up having to move early, I cut my lease early and moved to a different part of the city because people were yelling at me on my fucking patio and shit.
Really?
Yeah.
Like what, passerbys or?
People who knew me by name. Don't know if they got my information off the internet, but this was after I got doxxed and before the door knock from the FBI, you know. Just like fucking wild experience. I was like, you know what? Just going to cleanse my hands of this place and move on. You know what I mean? It's just wild, you know. It's not new. It's not a new phenomenon in the United States for this kind of harassment to happen.
It's literally always been the case.
Yeah. And it just feels especially dangerous given the events in this country in the last 2 years, you know. And
the ability for the internet to just have a bunch of people go after you. It's not local anymore like it used to be. Like, you know, if I was a fucking fascist in the 60s and I hated what was happening, you know, I could maybe like do a hate crime against somebody in my town, but I couldn't meaningfully do anything about the guy like Malcolm X in Harlem talking shit. But now with the internet, doxing, you know, posting your address online, knowing where your kids go to school, where your wife works, like the harassment can be done remotely in a new way, and so that broadens the sphere of people who can go after you. And after one of my doxes, like my mom would get creepy letters from fucking psycho Nazis talking about we're going to come visit you, and you know you're directly to blame for your son turning out like this. Like we're going to punish you because you created him. And my mom's not fucking political. She couldn't even tell you the difference between a Democrat and a Republican. And she's like, what in the, like, you know, scared, calls me crying and shit, man. Like, it's absolutely brutal, but you're right. Just another instantiation in a long line. And for like black and indigenous people who took that, who still to this day and historically have done that, it's not just harassment. It's, you know, bullets in heads, Malcolm X, MLK. Getting set up by the state, you know, Leonard Peltier, etc. Yeah. So
livelihoods and intergenerational trauma.
Fucking Malcolm X got his house bombed with his babies inside. They threw a bomb in the room where his little kids were sleeping. Holy shit, you know. So
fucking insane.
It really is a right-wing fucking white supremacist country, and it doesn't really like the left, does it?
No, it doesn't. Well, speaking of, I mean, we're probably going to see a GOP presidency in 2024, you know, and the Biden administration has not really been doing so hot either.
Yeah. How's that bipartisanship working out for you, Biden?
I mean, I think you've probably been following it a little bit closer than I have. You know, I get snippets on Twitter and shit, but the last I heard was the infrastructure bill is totally stalled out and has been gutted. And we've got certain political players who are stalling the whole process. And, you know, what have you been seeing? Because I personally have not been able to take a look at it as deeply.
Yeah, lots of thoughts. You know, I always put it this way, is like when the Democrats are out of power, they say we can't do shit because the Republicans have all the power. Okay, vote for us. Okay, and then we do, you know, or the Americans do. And then you have a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate. And then what happens? The conservatives inside the party serve the role that the external Republican Party does in times of being out of power. So you literally just be able to, and it's a rotating cast. So every time that there's this context in which the Democrats have a real chance to push through something transformative and actually live up to what they say that they want to do with this country, there's always somebody, and it's always somebody new, a couple people often, that rise up within the party and then prevent it. So in this case, this go-around, it's fundamentally or primarily Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. And it's Kirsten Sinema is an interesting thing because she comes from grassroots progressive organizing and then gets in the system. She is like the perfect cautionary tale of what happens
when you get that power.
Right, because she is to the left of the Democratic Party, criticizing liberals, talking about all these things that need to happen for regular working people, gets into power and becomes one of the furthest right in the Democratic Party, getting millions of dollars from all these corporations that she does the bidding of now. Like, you literally have a context in which, she's opposing the government being able to negotiate drug prices, and she's getting paid $500,000 from the pharmaceutical company. Or in Joe Manchin's case, literally he used to own, and then he had to hand over to his son, a business in the fossil fuel industry, which every year gives Joe Manchin himself $500,000 from this coal, basically, fucking company. And he's the one standing in the way of the climate aspects of this reconciliation, $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. And so these climate things are going to be gutted simply because one West Virginia millionaire who has a vested interest in maintaining the dirtiest form of the fossil fuel industry doesn't want to do. And this is all legal. Like, what he does with his company and the fact that he profits all is all above board based on the ethics committee of the Senate and stuff. And he'll be the first to tell you that I'm doing nothing wrong, and he's technically not. But these people who, it's like pure corruption, and it's front and center. And so with this reconciliation bill, it's the first time in our entire lives where there could be something that actually helps regular people, and we're all skeptical of the electoral system. I know that, but this reconciliation bill in its fullest, most robust form would provide, free universal 2-year college, child care, huge, most America's ever done on climate. And it's all being gutted, and it might not even get through in the end. And so then what do you have to say? Well, we're the Democratic Party. Our brand already sucks ass. Like, everybody fucking hates us already.
Yeah.
Biden's going to be the next FDR. All these promises. We really need a change. And you get in, and then you can't do anything, not because of the external Republican Party, but because of your own party itself. And that's because of the way that these parties are funded, the donor class, and how the Democratic Party itself functions. So, it's just like, how many times do we have to live through the same exact thing before enough people say, fuck this?
Right.
I think there is a grassroots need all across the political spectrum. There's a desire for another fucking party, something else. People would be happy with the European-style parliamentary system where at least there's multiple parties and you have to form coalitions and give some representation to anybody not in this tiny sphere of either reactionary right capital or, like, smiley face capital.
Right. Right. It's both sides of the same coin.
It really, truly, truly is. And it happens every time. It happened with Obama. It's happening again. And then what happens? Well, you're unable to do anything. And then the whole country takes a hard turn to the right. Somebody like Trump comes along and says, I'll just blow this whole fucking thing up. I'll put my middle finger in the face of all these assholes. And what does he actually do? Serves capital. Mm-hmm. His biggest policies were huge $1.5 trillion tax cut for the rich, opening up public land to fossil fuel drilling and extraction, all those executive orders pulling us out of the meager, far less than enough climate stuff that we were already in. So he's serving the interests of the worst elements of capital, but he does it under the guise of telling the whole system to fuck off. And so working class white voters get sucked in by the culture war shit and liking the aesthetics of somebody saying whatever the fuck he wants. But then their economic interests are actively and immediately undermined, and they can't quite see it because of this huge, propaganda apparatus that the right has been able to put together that the left cannot match. And so the right controls the narrative on everything.
Right.
And then even the ostensible left, CNN, New York Times, are the corporate left, and they get to do messaging control as well. So this reconciliation package isn't looking very good. If it does come through, it's going to be a tiny shadow of its former self. I think that the progressives in Congress did a good tactical job of tying the bipartisan infrastructure bill that has Republican support and can easily pass with the reconciliation bill, the more progressive bill. Like, they have to go together. And then the moderate Democrats agreed to that initially, but then they're going back on their word. So, I mean, applaud to the progressives for finally having some spine. It's never enough, and it's always too late, but I'd like to see a little bit of it. And we'll see how it plays out, but it's not looking good. And then if this doesn't come through, or if it does come through and the Democrats just can't tell Americans that they did it,
right.
They're going to be fucking blowed through by probably Trump 2024.
Yeah, I mean, Midterms are coming up.
Yeah.
So this majority that they have, that they blew the chance. They blew the fucking chance, as they usually do. I mean, the midterms are going to be disgusting. They're not going to be fun.
No.
And then we have to deal with another presidential election campaign, and I'm curious to see who else runs in the Republican field. Trump's definitely going to try. Pete Ricketts seems to be positioning himself with his rhetoric.
Could there be somebody with less charisma? Like, my God, you have no chance. This dumb, bald-headed ass.
Oh, my God. The fucking... Living in this state is infuriating.
God.
Infuriating.
God.
Just to pivot just a little bit. The fucking gerrymandering fiasco that happened a couple of months ago where So the Democrats successfully filibustered this gerrymandering attempt by the Republicans in the unicameral. But the Republicans responded by just creating a larger congressional district that included more Republican areas. So they still won.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
they still won. They annexed part of Sarpy County, so that now that's all part of the district that has an entire electoral college vote.
Yeah.
So that they can dilute the voter base. And the only blue district presidentially in the state, you know? And so you like...
Because here in the Omaha-Lincoln area, we were the blue dot in a red sea, right? Like, it's the one district in Nebraska that voted for Obama twice, et cetera. And so by expanding those districts into the rural area, you dilute the blue vote with red ring, exurban and rural votes. And so that's what they're doing.
And, you know, we don't do a winner-take-all electoral college.
Exactly.
So it's important to at least keep one blue district in terms of presidential elections.
And we're one of the only states that does that, right?
Yeah, I think there's
Maine and Nebraska?
two others.
Oh, two other states?
Two others, I think.
Maybe Maine is the other one with the unicameral. I don't know. But very rare.
Very rare. Even though it's, probably would benefit for it to just be that way in every state, but...
Yeah.
Oh, well. But, yeah, it's a bleak situation politically here. And, for all of the sort of shining lights that we're seeing with, increased class consciousness and the strike wave and things moving forward in that sort of general direction, I don't think we're going to be able to stave off fascistic GOP presidency in 2024. And at that point, we are well beyond the ability to, even in the sense of climate change, to try and tamp down the rapidly accelerating effects of global warming.
The American right has for long had fascist and anti-democratic strains within it, but for most of the last century, it's been this bipartisan consensus on basically neoliberal or centrism or whatever, especially since Reagan. But now what you're really seeing is with the demographic shifts happening in this country, the white, right-wing, often older, longtime majority is losing some of its certainly cultural power and is in fear of losing its economic and political power. And so we're seeing an whatever shards of democracy America's ever been able to have, and we can talk about that, but an explicitly anti-democratic strain in the Republican Party, with under the banner of Trump, and it articulates itself as if it's a defense. So, we're going to pass these laws through these red states that restrict voting, but we're going to still say that we totally believe in it. And the fact that we're doing this is not to restrict voting; it's actually to protect it from voter fraud that we've completely invented as a justification, or using Trump's big lie as a justification to be like, well, see, look, they stole this election. You believe that, right, fellow Republican? Therefore, we have to do these draconian voting right bills because they see what's coming. They see that this country culturally already has moved in a direction that they don't like. They don't like any directions that culture's moving because they tend to be moving in a direction opposite from them who wants to go back. They're seeing that they do have some advantages institutionally. They have the Senate, which is a fundamentally anti-democratic institution. They now have the Supreme Court through the fuckery of Mitch McConnell and just stealing a seat from Obama and then allowing Trump to put 3 on. So they have that. It's a fundamentally anti-democratic institution. You have the Electoral College, which overemphasizes the rural vote compared to the population centers. So you have these institutional advantages, and then they're trying to maintain this basically minoritarian rule. About 35%, I would argue about 35% of this country is like on the Trump train. There's Republicans that will choose Trump over a Democrat, but they're fundamentally not like hardcore, oinking hogs.
Right.
35% of this country, and they want 100% control of this country. And elections are not going to get in their way. And every election from here on out, the Republicans are going to say was stolen. And that's the new norm. It's not going away.
Yep.
The Democrat, they're not going to like lose an election in 2028 and be like, well, they won fair and square. Like that, those days are over.
Right.
And so these crises are mounting. The illegitimacy crisis of the government itself all across the political system is mounting, and something has to give. What will that be? I don't exactly know. Maybe there'll be like these fundamental realignment. Maybe we'll have an expansion of political parties. Maybe everything will fall apart and there'll be something like a civil war. Like the trajectories that America could take from here are multifaceted. They can go in very many directions. If I was like somebody who benefits from American empire as it is, a capitalist in charge, I want to maintain this system, and I want to maintain its legitimacy because I don't want to have to turn to fascism, which is imposing the system by force. I like, this sheen of democracy. What's best for this country to maintain its legitimacy? And it would be like something like Bernie Sanders style social democracy. Concessions. These people are suffering. Like if we give people like health care and we do these things that we can easily fucking do, and it really wouldn't threaten our overall position. A few companies would, like the insurance industry might, go out of business or whatever, but capital would be preserved. That would be the logical thing to do, and social democracy has been used in precisely that way historically as a release valve of these tensions that are building up, concessions. But this ruling class on both political parties seems unwilling to do that.
Right.
And so that is going to not be able to release that pressure, and it's going to continue to build up on the left and the right, and that's going to burst at some point, but exactly how it's going to burst and in what direction, who fucking knows? But we're in for some interesting times in the years ahead.
What a time to be alive!
Absolutely.
Holy fuck! Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with my roommate recently about the crisis of legitimacy that's been sort of ongoing for the last couple of years. I would think, certainly like ruptured heavily last summer. And then in the months, in the weeks leading up to the election, and then in the weeks leading up to the insurrection in January, just this like simmering, really like broiling cauldron of just this is the collapse. This is the start of the collapse of what we know as our institutions, right? And Biden's election felt like some sort of like stopgap measure to what was previously just rapid acceleration in that direction, And I think that's also part of the reason, in my limited sort of perspective here, is the reason why we don't really have an idea of the direction of where this next rupture is going to go. Because on its face, the Biden administration is in a lot of ways preventing that acceleration from happening, but is also branching off into a new, different type of like piece of collapse of what's going on in this country, culturally, institutionally, economically, And now we have the added sort of strain of what's the big bogey word now? Global supply chain collapse or bottleneck, leading to food and product shortages here in the United States. The continued major crises of natural disasters due to climate change all happening sort of on top of each other constantly, and then ineffective local and state and federal governments that are not responding appropriately or don't even have the resources to respond appropriately to these things, right? And what is it leading to? Probably the most militant labor movement we've seen in the last 25 to 30 years, right? We are also seeing what is likely going to be continued sort of mass movements like we saw last year. At this point, they happen, every year and a half to 2 years? We have these giant mass movements that just sort of rupture.
Occupy, Standing Rock, Ferguson, Baltimore.
Yep.
They're happening more and more and more.
Yeah. And so, at what point, maybe the way, and I think we've talked about this before, like maybe the way is to not necessarily predict or expect a certain thing to happen when it does happen, but to just prepare for it anyways, you know, and to, you know, build the sort of, to be an anarchist, to sort of prefigure these places, either locally in your neighborhood or whatever, these initiatives that are going to be able to react appropriately to whatever happens next.
Totally.
And hopefully, you know, stop yourself from starving to death at some point in the future. I don't know. It's wild.
Yeah, it is.
It's wild to live here, man.
And a couple things on those fronts. We just did an episode on Rev Left, you and I, about the labor movement, and I wanted to make this point, but I'll make it here. You know, Union Joe. Where's Scranton working class Joe Biden, right? This facade he props up about who he really is. When these massive unions are happening, this labor uprising, he could easily use the bully pulpit of the presidency to come to their aid, to take their side explicitly, and then you would force the media to cover it more in depth.
Right.
If Joe Biden starts using his pulpit to, but I mean, where is he really? We hear Jen Psaki all the time, but you really don't see Biden very much.
No.
We could talk about why, but he's not out front and center like Obama was or like Trump was. And that's, I mean, the White House did this mealy-mouthed, both sidesism response to the labor uprising when you could easily do, if you really believed it, but of course they don't. It's a facade. It's a way of getting votes, and seeming like a multimillionaire credit card corrupt fuck like Biden is a working class guy. The other thing, though, about where we're at as a society, you know, we can think of this as like, what's optimistically, where are we and where are we going? It could be the case that, and I'm not saying this is true, but it might be, because all the trajectories could be possible, that Trump is one of the last institutional gasps of this white reaction that is dying out, that less and less white people believe in. And it's this obnoxious last death throw, or one of the last death throws. And we're in this interregnum where the society has shifted away from, you know, mainstream American culture as it has been for the last 40, 50 years. But the people in power are still there. So we live in this gerontocracy where Biden, this 80, you know, Biden, Bernie, Trump, like all these people that are even at play to lead the country are from a previous era that even Bernie was a progressive edge of that previous era, but that era is dead. But it's like it lives on in zombie form through these old ass politicians whose political, like Joe Biden, whose whole political, he's been in fucking the government for 50 years. You know, his mindset is the 80s and 90s mindset that is already dead. The media is living on the momentum that is built up over the last century, but nobody really, I mean, Fox News and CNN, like less and less people every day pay attention to them. I mean, Fox News' audience is older and whiter, and they know that. And CNN doesn't have any more legitimacy than they do, and left and right are calling those fuckers out. So, we're, you know, best case scenario as a society, we're sort of living in this weird interregnum where the new world is sort of trying to be born, and the old world is dying. And we'll look back on this in 100 years and say, well, things turned out pretty well. This labor union turned into a new renaissance for the working class that reshaped policy, and the Republicans were forced to give up this anti-democratic, explicitly fascist Trumpian thing when they saw that the demographics has shifted such that they could not maintain power that way. And the corporate Democrats lost all credibility, and they had to, you know, actually become a party of the, or whatever, you know. You could see things going that now. The radical Marxist in me is very pessimistic of that.
Yeah, that would be nice.
That would be nice.
That would be nice, yeah.
And it would vindicate people who believe in this gradualist, things get better over time, but I'm very suspicious of that narrative. And ultimately, capital still has this country by the throat.
Right.
And that's ultimately what matters. They choose the parties, they buy the politicians, they dictate the policy. And so being able to use the democratic mechanisms and allowing culture to drag politics along with it is overly optimistic. And I think what's really going to happen is that something's going to have to break. It's going to be ugly. The next 10 years is going to be a fucking increasing struggle. And, you know, something's going to have to give in a major way. And that give is not going to be people gracefully handing over consent. It's going to be like conflict.
Yeah.
So that's more likely what's going to happen. But
well, yeah, I mean, that's a huge thing. It's like we are living through conditions and wealth inequality that is worse than the Gilded Age.
Yeah, amazing.
You know, Absolutely insane amounts of wealth being hoarded by
Worse after the pandemic.
Minuscule number of people. And they are flaunting the spending of that cash in our faces, going to space and bullshit like that. You know, and we're
Trillions
seeing
in wars that nobody supports.
exactly. And that inequality is filtering into every single thing that's happening. We can't escape it, right? And the gradual sort of move to censor that, to rein that in, to break up tech monopolies, for example, or whatever the things that are happening in the various committees that are, investigations that are happening at the federal level, aren't going to produce enough of a change in the material conditions for the working class.
Exactly.
And something is gonna snap, and more than likely it's going to be another rupture like we saw last year, except maybe more sustained, perhaps more violent.
Right.
But
and it was pretty fucking violent.
It was.
I mean, incredibly violent.
It was, and it happened so quickly and spread overnight.
Yeah. People being shot in the streets, like left-wing activists shooting and killing right-wing activists and vice versa, fist fighting every fucking week in major capitals, like insane amount of shit that we kind of moved on from. And we're still kind of in the foggy aftermath of. But when we look back historically, it'll really stand out.
Yeah. I mean, and having, we both lived through it. And
participated as much as we could in it.
And, I have never seen anything like what I saw in Minneapolis. It was the most joyful experience I've ever been in, and also the absolute most terrifying thing. You really see what the police state can do. When threatened, and it's not fun. And it's sort of a preview of what the left is going to experience when things really start getting worse. Pretty much every police budget in the country was increased after last year.
Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny? The whole Democratic Party is like, yeah, the police really need to be reformed. To like defund's a little too far, but then they get in and it's like, yeah, let's increase funding.
Yep.
Because ultimately, they're the ones that benefit from this society. They want to be protected from the fallout of the chaos that their policies have created. Ultimately, that's always going to take precedence over any ideological, like, we should shift these funds to like healthcare.
Right, right. And any fundamental change that's going to happen in this country is going to come at the end of such a violent rupture. I mean, you see that all the time. Chile didn't get any serious change until they rioted for weeks and weeks,
Or even America's history, abolitionism, civil rights. These are long, protracted struggles with immense amounts of reaction and violence in the meantime.
Yep.
Yeah. And also, like you mentioned, how fast everything is changing. The speed of technological change is disorienting. We're now in a globalized economy. There is no going back. This nationalist rise from Modi to Bolsonaro to Trump to Orban and everywhere in between is fundamentally a reaction against globalization. There's the economic globalization where there's like NAFTA and the trade, and there's legitimate critiques of that. But the problems are globalized, pandemics and climate change. The world is globalized through communication. There is no going back fundamentally. We can make the global order much better. As socialists, internationalists, we want that. Under capitalism, it takes a very specific form and plenty of reasons for critique. But what was often overlooked, I think, is the speed of radical technological change that is going to put huge pressure, and already is, on every institution that exists, and it's only going to continue its rapidity. It's going to get faster and faster and faster and build off each other, and that is going to put real stress on these institutions that are not pliable enough to keep up. And so that's going to cause, and already is, and is going to continue to cause a bunch of disruptions globally. But then there's also, what gives me sort of some hope is there, this dialectical relationship between what's happening. So, like, what is the impact of a Trump? Well, it lit a fire under the ass of the left. These young people coming up who are instinctively and aesthetically and viscerally opposed to like racism and Trump's grotesquerie moved left. The Trump movement is like, make America great again. We want America to be what it used to be. But no single president has done more damage to the international reputation of the U.S. So it's like everything that they want to do also creates the very resistance to that. And it's also true on the left.
Right.
When we advance, and reaction is inevitable. So you have Black Lives Matter saying, hey, this racial struggle is not fucking over just because Obama's president. There's still these really real issues. We're going to make that a fucking thing. And then the moment you do, you have right-wing reaction. So these things are going to go back and forth. And the right doesn't have that sort of dialectical view. They want total and complete control. But every time they try to assert it and grab it, it creates the blowback that is the very thing that dislodges their grip in the first place. And they can't really come to terms with it. And I think that's one of our advantages. And I also think that the left, it's worth saying because, sometimes people can get too down on themselves, like the left isn't where it needs to be. And that's true. But the left is incredibly bold. And the left has huge numbers. Much more than the right, and we're more organized than the right. When the right tries to get together, it can't quite do it. If there's fascist movements in any city, the left organically rises up to counteract it. When the right wants to do something like it, it has to fly people in. So like January 6th is like, in the last 4 years, the right asserting itself, or Charlottesville, the right asserting itself. And what actually has to happen is you have to get all the right from all around the country concentrated in one place to get the numbers. But with left-wing protests, the Women's March, more liberal, but whatever, Black Lives Matter, more militant, Occupy, anything like that, even the resistance to Trump when he got elected, and the fucking huge protest that broke out just for the fact that this asshole was elected, is in every major city. The numbers are already there.
Right.
And so we have these numbers. We have this boldness burning down the fucking police department and chasing the cops away. Last year when they were at the gates, shaking the gates around the White House, and the White House had to turn its lights off, and Trump had to go into the safe room and shit. Like, holy fuck. Like, what would have happened if those fences would have fallen? Like, for that moment there, I was on the precipice. Like, this could be some wild shit.
Yeah.
If the left gets in, we're still not organized enough. But, like, what happens if the left does a January 6th style thing? It's like, are we going to be in there taking pictures with our shaman helmets and not really know what to do? If there's more organization, could we actually take some? I mean, who knows?
Be taking gunfire from the cops.
You
honestly.
would be, I think, definitely. And there would have been more security there from the get-go.
Yep.
There would have been the National Guard already present if
Yep.
it was a left-wing thing. So the reaction from the state to the left versus the right is glaring.
But it is interesting to see. Looking back on the uprising over the summer and just the organic nature of it, and how quickly it rose up, right, and how quickly it organized itself within 48 hours. And each city takes on a particular character that's based in that city. For us in Omaha, it was the tragic murder of James Scurlock, and then the police response and the DA's response afterwards, and the broad sort of umbrella of racial justice against police brutality took on a message that was very important to this locale, right? And sort of illustrates the plurality and the universality of these ideas amongst the left,
exactly.
Which is scaring the fucking shit out of the state.
Yeah.
Scaring the absolute shit out of them.
And the right.
Yep.
And the right has to resort to conspiracy theories to make sense of it. Because if they didn't resort to conspiracy theories, they'd have to admit, like, there's a lot more of them than us. They're in all these cities. They rise up organically in every major city. So they have to be like George Soros, and Antifa's being funded by something, and Venezuela still, they have to mire themselves in these conspiracy theories to make it make sense in a way that doesn't explode their entire idea, which is that they are the silent majority. That, most people agree with me, and if we only were able to get our, but the truth is, less and less people believe in their bullshit every day. And so they have to build these sandcastles in the sky about what's really happening. Well, George Soros is funding these Antifa people. They don't really believe in, like, racial justice or anything. They're just, like, opportunistic crisis actors or whatever. And so that's kind of interesting to see that they have to try to resort to those explanations,
Yeah.
And that's the strength of the left, and we should compound on that. We could always use more organization, because what happens when you don't have pre-existing organizations is crisis hits, there's spontaneous uprisings, but then they either get co-opted or the energy dissipates. And they're rarely sharpened into political demands that can be backed up with force, which is what you fucking need to actually advance these things politically and economically. So the left is also decimated from anti-communism, Red Scare, neoliberalism, and we're over in the last 10 years since Occupy, and probably maybe you can even go back to like WTO in 99, and then opposition to the Iraq War, such as it was, as the left finding its feet after decades of being obliterated off the map of internal American politics. And that's going to take time. And so we can't be too impatient with that process developing, but it is developing and it's getting stronger every day.
Well, and you have to also consider, the inclusion of and introduction of the digital era and the new technology, right? You were talking about technology earlier, and there is a strain of media studies that really looks at the concept of alternative media as it exists within ostensibly left political circles, particularly new media, digital media, modes of sharing information, whether it's wikis and pirating or info shops and culture jamming, these types of new ideas that have been introduced with the invention of Web 2.0, right? And how they're being used by organizations to inform and to energize and call to action, right? And it's part of what my book is about, right? I'm focusing in specifically on the last 5 to 10 years or so of particular modes of information sharing, the rise of podcasts and live streamers, right? Particularly last year about how this information was shared across the country, how we knew it was happening in Portland because someone was live streaming it.
Immediately.
Yeah, and how we could mobilize defense funds across state lines and communicate with each other. And, see, ultimately how that can be leveraged for further political organizing. These types of technologies they weren't popular in 2012, I didn't even get a smartphone until it was 2012,
Same, yeah.
And we weren't necessarily.
I had a pager in high school.
Yeah, right. Flip phone.
Junior in high school, I had a pager. Yeah.
Flip phone that my sister and I shared. Yeah, that's all I had. And Occupy was organized a lot online, and had the ability to organize these sort of things through Facebook and various websites and stuff. But now that we see these more integrated and somewhat more organic ways of communicating with each other, either on social media platforms or secured messaging platforms and the various nodes and networks that we've set up. What does that look like in the next 20 years? Because it's only been about 5 years that we've really been kind of playing around with this technology and seeing how this technology works for organizing on a large scale.
Yeah.
Yellow Vest protests started on Facebook, but did not stay there, and you see the way that these movements are reacting to technology that we didn't have in 2003.
Totally.
And what does that look like? And how does that change how these movements interact with each other?
Right.
Sharing GoFundMes for strike funds 700 miles away,
right.
And getting people from overseas helping these workers' movements.
Totally.
Those types of internationalist and fully national sort of communication and solidarity is unique to our current situation, I think.
Exactly. And, yeah, and that gets to my point earlier about the globalization of so many things, including communication. And those impacts are making the world a smaller place. If there's an uprising tomorrow in fucking Tunisia or in Japan, we would know about it immediately, and we would see visceral images of it immediately. What is the impact of smartphones on Black Lives Matter? If you were not able to fucking take your phone and say, this is what the police actually do, because everything before that, you took the cops' word for it. Cops don't lie. There's enough white Americans who believe that bullshit to be whatever the cop says goes.
Right.
Black people are over-exaggerating how hard it is. You could easily say that as a cloistered white person, but even the right had to deal with the George Floyd. Come on, look, see? Or so many instances of clearly innocent Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, so many instances that without that fucking video evidence, it would have been easily manageable and knocked away. You could convince enough white Americans it really didn't happen. Chauvin is right. Why would we believe George Floyd over him?
Right.
But the video evidence can't be fucking contested. And so that globalization of communication is going to have huge impacts. And then the entrance of quantum computing, the entrance of genetic editing, the artificial intelligence. We are a global world. And like it or not, and it's going to take different forms, but there's no going back to the little nation states. And even war, large-scale war between America and China is less likely than it was 70 years ago because of the globalized economic system. America can't, we can't take China not trading with us.
Right.
It'd be absolutely devastating to our economy. And it's kind of interesting how it works to prevent real large-scale conflict like we've been able to see in the past. So there's pros and cons to all this, because the other side of allowing leftists to give funds across state lines and international borders is the hyper purveying of right-wing conspiracy theories that come on those same exact platforms.
Well, and the high surveillance. Right?
Surveillance by the state, 100%.
Surveillance by the state. I mean, I got a door knock over a tweet.
Really?
Yeah.
What was the tweet?
The tweet was it was New Year's Eve tweet, just expressing, I love you, comrades. We've shown that we can burn down a police precinct, and
oh, shit.
And I got a door knock like 2 months later. Cops said, "We're here about your tweet," and I was like, "What
God.
Tweet? I have 18,000 tweets," and they pulled out a printed copy of it, and someone had tagged the FBI underneath it.
My God.
And they were like, "Do you know anyone who's ever burned down a precinct?" I was like, "No, man, I'm a journalist."
Yeah.
Like, what? Like, are you serious?
Damn.
And they immediately pivoted to, "Have you been threatened because of your coverage?" And I said, "Of course I have. I just got doxxed."
And you're here right now.
Enrico Terrio, who's rotting in a jail in D.C., knows who I am, And they're like, "Oh, wow. Here, take our card. We'd love to have an ear to the ground about what's going on." And it's like, absolutely not, But the fact that, like, this communication also comes with total mass surveillance. I mean, we've been living in a police state for as long as we can remember.
Mm-hmm.
It's been that way always. If we didn't live in a police state, we wouldn't hear that fucking helicopter every day.
Exactly.
And that surveillance is also something that is a struggle for particularly the American left, which is the sort of center of this quote-unquote technological progress in terms of communications networks. Even though our infrastructure is crumbling, at least our internet's good.
Exactly.
But, we have these districts in California, and we have, the absolute domination of Amazon and Amazon's, a wire service kind of networking that they do with various other conglomerations and things like that. It's pervasive. Mm-hmm. People listen, ads listen to our conversations, and we have sold ourselves to the branded content of the internet unknowingly, And again, we can't go back. There's no way to go back from that. But how do you move forward, and how do you leverage these networks to your benefit?
Right.
While also knowing that as much as you can try to obscure yourself, you can't do it completely without just shutting the whole thing down.
Exactly.
And to do that is to cut yourself off from the rest of the world.
Right. And just with the dialectical point, like this is pushback, this is feedback, everything happens, and then there's a reaction to it, and a reaction to that, and a reaction to that. And so we see the state using these social media outlets to intimidate and harass and crack down on and surveil. But then we also see the rise of like people taking their online privacy more seriously, encrypted apps. Mm-hmm. Now on Twitter, if you're on the left, and I know you know this now more than anybody, watch what you say, because you don't need to say something that technically is not protected by freedom of speech. Anything at all that allows them to come knock on your door is a way for them, ideally, to get a finger in that pot to see what the left's doing. But even if they can't do that, they're intimidating and harassing you and disincentivizing you from either doing that again, using your voice at all, joining protests. Like when a protest is brutally cracked down on, like the bridge, or earlier when I was arrested a couple of years back in 2017 after Trump, with the rally against the fascist right, there is always the attempt to make it as harsh on you as possible. So the charges are ramped up. You have to spend a lot of time going to the courts, paying money, whatever you have to do. And that whole thing is to dissuade you. So grabbing a journalist and arresting them, well, they were just a journalist. They're technically, you shouldn't be doing that. They're doing exactly what they know they have to do. Because the next time that journalist wants to go out and cover street protests, they're going to think twice. Mm-hmm. Maybe I don't go to that one because last time I got arrested and that fucking sucked, and I still have a court date, Mm-hmm. And so they're going to continue to use that, and the left's going to continue to adapt. Just basic hygiene is really important. Assume everything you say online is 100% going to be monitored. And that's why I have a Twitter for my show. But I took away my personal Twitter because I would just say, these algorithms get you worked up, and all of a sudden you tweet something and like, fuck, I forgot about that tweet the next day.
Yep.
But like 2 weeks later, like you say, somebody's knocking on my door about it. So like what I do is I try to, like, every few months, like a tweet delete is an app that you can use that goes, and you can do it a week ago and everything beyond, 6 months ago and everything beyond, but routinely just delete your presence as much as is possible.
Well, and again, a lot of what we talk about is not actionable speech, but the feds do not care.
Exactly, and the fascists don't either.
The fascists don't either. I mean,
all my tweets and shit that I posted online, like an old Twitter account was found, and that's how they got pictures of me to put on their flyers. So whatever they can use, they will.
There is no nuance online, so you may be speaking facetiously, but It doesn't really matter. Someone else could interpret it a different way. And that might put you in jail, as happened to an ex-YPG fighter in Florida.
Really?
Yeah, he tweeted about, during the insurrection, he tweeted about inciting a armed response at the Capitol in Florida. And he was arrested, and he just got sentenced to, I think, 5 years in federal prison for it. Yep.
Jesus Christ.
So they watch. They look for ways to exploit.
And when the state sees the left and the right militarizing and getting more intense, they're going to crack down, and they're cracking down on the right as well. Because for the FBI, they're not the racist, Trump-supporting cop on the street necessarily. The FBI believes in the system as it stands and wants to defend it from both the far left and the far right. Now, the far left inherently poses a more structural, deeper threat to the status quo, right? All the right wants is their preferred millionaire to be in charge. They're not really threatening class hierarchy and shit like that. But obviously, if you let fascist violence get too out of control, it's going to undermine the system. It's going to take away the monopoly on force that the state has. So the FBI, as a more highbrow than the regular street cop agency, is going after some elements of the right, but will always be harsher on the left precisely because ultimately the left poses a deeper threat. And so you have this weird situation where the right, you like to see the FBI cracking down on the right, because when your enemies are engaged in conflict, it's good for you, generally speaking. And so, you have after January 6th, FBI is pulling these people out of their jobs and their houses, holding them accountable. It dissuades right-wing activism, so whatever, that's not terrible to see them fight. But we all know that the same lines they cross and the mechanisms they put in service of attacking the right will always and inevitably be used harsher and more intensely against the left. So you have to be a little, I don't want to show too much support for this. It puts you in a weird situation. But they're trying to put out fires on their left and their right, and something has to give. Is the system going to be able to adapt? Or is it going to have to be dismantled in some way or ruptured from or confronted or as we've been talking about, some bigger conflict has to happen to dislodge? I don't know, but with every move that the state makes and that the right makes, the left learns and adapts, and we do something and they learn and adapt. And so it's this never ending back and forth.
Yeah. We've been talking for an hour and a half.
Really? Wow. Minus 60 though.
Oh boy, so about an hour. Yeah,
roughly. Yeah.
We'll find a way to end this. Every time we start talking, this is what happens.
Forever.
This is what happens. I just want to circle back around just a little bit to kind of think about the ways in which, we had this conversation on your podcast about the strike wave, and about specifically the Kellogg strike here, and the ways in which the working class has come together in the last couple of months to really kind of push back against what are these tightening sort of lines of division, really, in the face of an ineffective government. You know what I mean? Yeah. And you sort of asked me the question. I've been asked the question before. I was on Robert Evans' podcast, and he asked me a question about this, about what sort of things is this particular strike wave going to do to sort of bridge the gap between these individual private sector strikes and a larger, wider labor revolution? I don't have an answer. Do you?
Articulate the question one more time.
Well, the question is, how do we bridge the gap between these individual strikes that are happening in the private sector that are generally apolitical but are rife with class consciousness, right? How do we turn that into a more sort of general, nationwide, ever moving forward, labor revolutionary movement,
The way you need to do that is you need to marry it to a political movement. And, with two parties and the state of political consciousness more broadly and historically, that has been the Democratic Party. So you would take that union power, it would be articulated through a political vehicle like the Democratic Party. Politicians coming out of the labor movement would emerge and would advance the project and nationalize the labor struggle that way in a previous time. But since neoliberalism, that's done. Since Clinton, the Democratic Party is firmly on the side of capital. It has been. The Republican Party is as well, regardless of what bullshit they fucking say. And so you have the donor class of both parties fundamentally preventing that from happening. Like I said earlier, even Union Joe, Scranton Joe, isn't fucking coming out and supporting the shit in the way that he should.
Right.
So as somebody on the further left than liberalism, those political institutions need to be created. They're there in nascent form, both on the anarchist and the Marxist left, but certainly developing them and reaching higher levels of organization. And the left in this country doing the same thing that you were just mentioning that we want to see from the labor movement, which is jump out of merely localized organizations and create something more national, and ideally past that international. So you have to marry it to a political program, or they're going to continue to be isolated, and capital is going to continue to dominate not only the media, but both political parties, and prevent that coming into the political mainstream and marrying it to a vehicle. So that's why the activist left needs to be engaged with this sort of struggle and be present in all the ways that we mentioned on the show. So that really is the task, is increasing our levels of organization. Something like the Black Lives Matter rally last year, right? We've seen it be co-opted by the Democratic Party, and as far as that can happen, we've seen the energy dissipate. That's natural. It's nobody's fault. It's what happens. If there was higher levels of political organization on the radical left, we could have, as I said earlier, turned that into a spear point with political demands backed up by real force. But we didn't have it. And it's the same thing now is happening with the labor movement. It needs to be married to a political program. That political program and that organization doesn't exist yet. We have to continue to try to create it. There's no easy answers here, you know?
Yeah. What do you say to the sort of union presidents who, say, for example, a couple of weeks ago, the couple left groups wanted to bring spaghetti to the strike line? Omaha Autonomous Action bills itself is an anarchist and communist group who, does mutual aid in homeless encampments. I fielded a phone call from Dan Osborne, the union president, who was terrified of the fact that anarchists would be showing up to the strike line and didn't know who this group was, and asked me who they were and the work that they were doing. And it wasn't until I explained to him the work that the group does, working in homeless encampments, providing mutual aid, and being able to be a through line to gaining supplies or these types of things for homeless folks who generally do not have the ability or the financial ability to gather these supplies. Finally, he goes, "Oh, okay, well then actions speak louder than descriptors." So there were people on these strike lines who heard the word anarchist, who heard the word communist, who heard the word IWW or red card holder or socialist and went, "Nope, sorry, fuck that. I don't like that. That's scary." It calls to mind the Haymarket martyrs. Someone's going to throw a bomb at the Pinkertons behind the line. We don't want them throwing bricks at these security guards. That was the concern that they had, is that these, the far left is often associated with militant violence, when the reality is we're just a bunch of nerds who want to help each other.
Exactly.
And it wasn't until these folks got a chance to meet these individuals face to face and talk to them that suddenly they realized they had so much more in common, and it wasn't really about the political ideology.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I feel like there's always going to be this sort of post Red Scare, post anti-communist movement, post Cold War issue with people who are even 10 years older than us, who are in their 40s. You know what I mean? Who grew up with a specific idea of who these groups are, especially in a red state.
Totally. There's conservative guys in that picket line, and they don't like Antifa.
No, exactly. Yeah. Right. So how do you even build something beyond that? I mean, the only thing that I can think of as we're talking here is just to emphasize the solidarity of the struggle, and not necessarily talk about specific ideologies about who's right and who's wrong and what's going to work and what's not going to work. Right. Because you and I both know that should a revolutionary movement emerge like that, it could go any way. Yeah. You know what I mean? And there are going to be certain ideologies that end up emerging as top ones to try and restructure society, right? Yeah. At least that would be my take from it. People are going to be jockeying to try and influence that. And we saw that with the Arab Spring, right?
And the Yellow Vests.
Yep, and the Yellow Vests. Though they didn't really have an outcome that specifically called for one ideology, true. Which perhaps was why it was so lengthy and so successful, and what it did attempt to do, which is create a modern, regular protest movement. And they did that without the trade unions.
Yeah, interesting.
But yeah, it's interesting to think about, a lot of folks that you see on left Twitter and the like are always talking about suffusing these worker movements with revolutionary ideology. And it's like, you clearly have never talked to a worker before.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, you cannot walk down to a picket line and say that you're going to save the day because you're an anarchist and you know what's next.
Oh my
You know
God,
what I
you'd be
mean?
laughed off the fucking block.
At Warrior Met Coal, people got punched in the face because they went down there and they were flyering with socialist newspapers
Yeah.
to a bunch of tried and true, hard-headed,
Yes.
red miners. What?
Yes, exactly.
You know? Like, how do you... I suppose this will be a conversation for another time because we are really getting into it. But it's a question to consider as to, like, as we marry this to a political movement, what is that going to be characterized by?
Yes.
Struggle against the ruling class? Probably going to be more successful than Communist Vanguard Party.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. And yeah, I have some thoughts on this because this is really important. We'll end with this. This back and forth because it's really important. This idea, like, going out and handing out like hammer and sickles or circle A's to guys on a picket line who don't know what the fuck you're talking about is getting ahead of the people, right? In Maoist terms, like getting ahead of the masses. You're coming to these people, not meeting them where they are whatsoever. You're way ahead of them, and it's just going to turn them off. Like, fuck off. That's not what this is about at all. We're trying to fucking get food on our table. So in the short term, the way to interact is you don't need to come out, trying to turn this into your thing. And this is where Twitter silos and social media silos become disorienting because you get in this idea if all you're seeing all day on your feed is like everybody agrees with you and they're far as fuck to the left, you get detached from regular people and you can't talk to them anymore. So I personally make sure that not only talk to the people in my life that are just normal fucking people, but like I engage with media outlets that normal fucking people would engage with. I never want to lose my grip on what actually regular people are like. I have my political program. I need to meet them where they are, and we need to be in dialogue. I'm not telling them what to fucking do. And off the cuff, most people would reject my politics if asserted ideology first. I'm a fucking Marxist that's sympathetic to Leninism and Maoism, and they'd be shut the fuck up. But if you talk to me as a human being, and I relate to you as a working class person, I can talk with anybody. I've talked to hardcore conservatives. I've talked to, union heads. I can talk to anybody on that level if I just know how to fucking be a regular person. And these silos online stop you from being able to do that and radically distort your vision of where regular people stand. So that's one thing. So in the short term, go to people and just say, what can I do to help? I'm here to show support. I don't need to tell you that I'm a fucking Marxist. Who cares? We can talk about that if we get to it. But right now, it's your struggle. I'm here to lend support in whatever way. You mentioned going up and saying, what can I do?
Right.
That's how you approach. You don't hand out your fucking leaflets.
Right.
Now, in the medium term, the humanization process is important. And this is where anybody can play a role. You don't even need to have a fucking social media account, let alone a larger platform to do this, which is in your family and friends, within your sphere of influence. Be yourself. These are my politics. I am a communist, and this is what that means to me, and this is the world I want to build, and these are specifically, my critiques of this system, etc. Now, people won't agree with you, right? Your uncle might not agree with you. Your friend from high school might not agree with you, but you're humanizing that politic. So the next time that they're watching Fox News or Tucker Carlson or online in their own silo, and somebody's like, fucking kill these commies, the first thing that's going to pop to their head is not like some distorted image of Fidel and Che or Stalin, but it's going to be my nephew. And I was, let's not kill them. They have some points. We can,
Right.
So you're humanizing the thing, and that takes time. We are already doing that. The people in my family, for example, know exactly where I stand on things, and they are unable now to put us all in a box and have some general dehumanizing stereotype about us.
Same with my family.
Yeah, exactly. So we're humanizing the political program without asking people to agree with us yet. But when the word comes to mind, they're going to think of you and me, not fucking Stalin, right? And that's really important. So that's a more medium term. We talked about short term, meeting them where they are, just asking how you can help. Medium term, humanizing our politics. And then more longer term is I would be completely fine with a political party that operates in the electoral realm that is working class primarily. So you have the Democrats, you have the Republicans. If there's a multiracial, it can't be a fascist movement, and it wouldn't be, because fascism fundamentally is more petty bourgeois than working class proper, and has always acted in defense of capital, not labor. But you have, let's say, a movement that comes up that is worker-led, and it wants to confront the Democrat and the Republican Party. And people in this coalition are weird, right? There's like some center-right guys, and there's some union guys who don't have politics that we agree with, and there's like some black liberationist people and some fucking Marxists and anarchists. But we're under this thing that's like primarily like we're advocating for the working class, and we're going into the electoral realm to do that. It's a third party or whatever. You know, things would have to change to allow that, but things could. And I think most Americans, when polled, say they would love a third, fourth, and fifth option, please.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And you could easily see a working class political party come up and say, hey, we can disagree about all these cultural war issues, but you know, on these things, we're fundamentally about advancing the ball for working people. And so that could be a political project that could give voice and help develop that. These are all things that need to develop. It's not going to be anarchists and Marxists coming to the rescue of the world. It's going to be much messier than that.
Oh, yeah.
So get that idea out of your head.
Yeah.
And then figure out how to operate in the actual concrete conditions we exist in, not in the Twitter silos or the world that we wish we existed in.
Right.
Those are at least gesturing to some of those solutions.
Yeah. Yeah, it took about 3.5 years of very patient, constant conversations with my mom to turn her into mom rat. Like she's finally, you know, at some point last summer, she came to this like conclusion about personal politics and where the GOP stood as opposed to where it was when she was younger, you know. And it now when she thinks of this, you know, my anarchist daughter, you know what it is, you know, it's me, you know,
exactly.
It's not some freaky bomb wielding mask wearing asshole on the street who's blowing up police stations. You know what I mean?
Right. Like this caricature in their head.
Right. It's this bookish, nerdy,
good-hearted,
dignified, you know, humbled as fuck, weirdo who's just kind of like working a job and teaching and, you know, has these politics that informs how she acts.
Totally.
And, you know, for me, it makes my life better to be more cognizant and aware of how to be helpful because we all live in the shittiest fucking system ever, you know. And I really hope that more as younger folks are coming into the beginning stages of their political education, which I remember being an upstart anarchist when I was 16. Yep. I was fucking insufferable.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Horrible.
Totally.
Just not.
When you first learn, you're overextending your hand every day.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And you really don't have a real understanding of how these systems work.
Yes.
You've barely even like figured out what it means to be a working person. You know what I mean? And you read like a shitload of political theory that you don't fully grasp, and then and then you just run your mouth off.
Exactly.
And now online you can do that.
The hubris of youth.
Oh my God, you can do that all the time. And you know, thankfully, when I was like 19 and 20, I had people who just kind of like carefully sat me down and was like, "Okay, dial it back. Mm-hmm. Have you considered this perspective?" You know, and like really kind of like help shape politics. And then post-Trump, like really just kind of went running with it to like really understand these political systems. And any sort of conception of revolution is messy, is probably violent, is not going to look like your idealized version. You might die in it, you know what I mean? It's not going to look good. But hopefully on the back end, what happens is an improved society.
Yes.
It may not be utopia, but it's going to be better than this one.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. And
tempering your expectations for how that happens makes you a more effective leftist, really. Yes. And a more effective human being. Mm-hmm. And sort of helps you give pause when you would rather punch a conservative in the face instead of say, you and I are on the same page about problems. Have you considered this solution instead?
Exactly.
You know?
And and every conservative I've personally met, like coworkers, anybody that you've been able to be in my life and actually know me as a person, none of them hate me. You know, we're fucking cool. And that's so important to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. Don't dehumanize them if you don't want them to dehumanize you, and meet them somewhere. And you'll often find when you talk to like a working class conservative, not like a fucking weirdo Trump, brainwashed.
We're not talking about fascists or Trumpists or QAnon folks.
Whose brains are scrambled eggs.
Yeah.
But regular like working class conservatives, you talk to them, you get past the bullshit, and you're willing to criticize your own side, you can open up a conversation and find out that you actually agree with a lot more than you thought. And they're not some fucking monstrous, racist piece of shit who hates people that don't look like them, the caricature that you create about them, mm-hmm. and you're not that. for them. And when you're talking about operating and humanizing your politics within your friend and family group, being a good person is essential to that. Because if you're kind of like a shitty, selfish asshole, like, yeah, your family has to love you no matter what. And like your friends, I've been friends with them for a while, you're just not really reliable. Well, your politics are going to be far less convincing in that context. But if you're really you go out of your way to be a good person, to really help the people in your life that are in need, and ideally your community as well, that also speaks volumes. How do you actually behave and treat people? That will color what they view your politics as. Yeah, he's a communist. He has some crazy ideas, but when I need help moving, he was the first to show up. And when I lost my mom, he was the first person to send flowers and to read. That sort of shit. That's where the moral comes into this. And we talk about structural issues, and you don't want to be an individualist. I get that, but we also have responsibilities at the individual level to be as good of a person as we can be. And that old Gandhi quote that is often maligned by the left because it's too simplistic, and it is: be the change you want to see in the world. There's a place for that. It's married to this broader collective, structural, transformative project, but holding yourself to a high standard of behavior, of taking ethics seriously, of trying to consciously cultivate and grow your own character in the right direction, also helps the political project that's coming out of your mouth when you go to try to convince somebody. And so that's why I think, ethical standards and setting them high for yourself and really practicing being a good person, not just saying, I have the right ideas, therefore I'm a good person.
Right.
But no, it doesn't matter what you think about the world. There are leftists that have great ideas that are assholes and pieces of shit that nobody trusts or likes.
Right.
And there are conservatives that have shitty ideas, but, have hearts of fucking gold at the end of the day.
Right.
And so marrying those things, I think, is part of this project as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a really good way to end this conversation, because we could go on forever.
Absolutely. It's always fun talking with you.
You need to come back on, and I would ask you to be my co-host, but I feel like you probably have way too much shit going on. But yeah,
I will be a frequent guest.
Please do. Yes. Thank you so much for coming on. This is probably going to be the inaugural episode of Morning Riot, so I really appreciate you taking the time. Any final words or thoughts, or you want to plug your shows or anything?
Yeah, well, just thank you so much for having me on. I love how our relationship has evolved over the years. It's really cool to see where we've ended up so far, and I look forward to where it goes in the future. For anything related to me, you can go to revolutionaryleftradio.com, find all our shows, social media, all that shit.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.